taking your own advice. Today I'm pretty tired. I'm on like 2 hours of sleep. So, it's those times that you're deprived of your necessities that you feel most wise, most existential, and all the amazing ideas just come to you. On this beautiful platform, we have a lot of creators like myself who create content where they give advice to others. And it's often, it is great, to be honest. And often the advice you give is the advice that you feel like you needed to hear yourself, maybe just moments ago. But one of the most difficult things to do in life is to take your own advice. Because, giving advice out is one of the easiest things to do in life, just in general, right? You look at somebody's situation, it's easy to see and, think from a logical perspective what's going wrong and what's going correct, give them most appropriate advice. But when it comes to ourselves and our own individual experience, we often find it difficult to be able to, take our own advice. Because it requires us to go into a dark place, right? To look ourselves in the mirror long enough to face ourselves, to face our darkness and everything that we've suppressed for such a long time. And to be honest with you, I think this is really interesting because I think people are really appreciative of people where there is a congruence between what it is they think, what it is they preach, and how it is they behave. And when all of these three are in alignment, I feel like an individual is then in their divinity, right? They're in their divineness. Like, I think we live in a very hyper-aware society where everybody's aware of their traits and their shortcomings, what they don't like about themselves, what they need to change in order to get to where they want to be. And even if they aren't, they can seek the advice, search on a TikTok search engine or a YouTube search engine and find the exact piece of advice they're looking for. But the honest truth is change is hard because it requires us to look at ourselves, to sit with ourselves, and to face that which we've been avoiding the whole time. We've been in avoidance of our emotions for a very long time. And oftentimes having to face what you've avoided for a long time is a difficult task. Because change requires us to change our identity first and act outside of how we would usually act. And oftentimes people like to opt for the reason, I'm only human. I do have shortcomings, but that's only part of being human. As a way of us resonating with our misery or our mediocrity out of sheer avoidance to change. Taking your own advice is necessary because it allows you to slay the biggest dragon, which is yourself, your shadow self, that which you suppress, that which not everybody knows about you, which most people don't even know about you, that even you don't know about you. And a way we can begin to slay this dragon is by sitting with ourselves long enough and meditating. Oftentimes, the obstacles that we come across in life that, make us quit the pursuits that we are doing aren't really the obstacles that are stopping us from getting to where we want to be. But is the part of ourselves that we are afraid to face. I'll give you an example. Let's say you run a business and you're trying to do something and you come across a roadblock and you spend weeks on that roadblock, only eventually for you to quit because you couldn't get past that hurdle. It is not the hurdle that you're trying to get past, but a part of your face that you're afraid to face. And what's interesting about that is you'll come across that same hurdle repackaged differently within your individual experience. You'll come across that exact hurdle repackaged in a different experience. Because it's not the experience in itself that stops you, but it's that part of yourself that you're afraid to face. It really does start with meditation. Because meditation to sit with yourself without judgment, observe your thoughts and your emotions without identifying it with it too much. And to see yourself in a certain light, to see yourself as a person who thinks those thoughts or who has those emotions. It is really simple. It's just like giving advice to others. We know what it is that we need to do in order to get to the next stage. But it requires us to deal with the emotions that come up. And we can do this very simply. We can do this by implementing mental models, right? That help us overcome these hurdles and these obstacles. We need to understand what emotions are going to come up when you do certain behaviors and actions. And put systems in place to remind yourself that it isn't as deep as you take it to be, right? And I'm going to give you an example. When I find myself, starting out as a content creator, a big fear is the fear of being perceived. And although you understand on a logical basis that you shouldn't care about what other people think of you. On an emotional level, you just can't help but care. But you must remind yourself that people only think of you as much as they think of themselves. Because your emotions don't operate on logic. So you must constantly reinforce to yourself that you no longer identify with the old identity. The adult version of you doesn't care that much. But that inner child, that little boy or little girl who didn't receive the love they felt like deserved, feels and fears, right, not receiving those sort of things. And that is a part of you that comes up. And your ability to soothe it is equally tied to your ability to progress forward. Taking your own advice requires you to sit and meet with your younger self, discuss with it why it feels a certain way, and help it understand that that wasn't the case and they misinterpreted the situation. But also validate their emotions. I understand. It may be on the playground, those kids, counted you out. They didn't want to play with you, and that made you feel some type of way. But it wasn't because you weren't enough. It just was because they were raised incorrectly. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. How are you? You good? Yeah, I'm a YouTuber. I'm filming some YouTube videos. I'll see you tomorrow, okay? Assalamu alaikum. To sit with that and constantly have a meeting with that inner child, that younger version of self, and to direct it and help first validate their emotions by let them know and guide them through how to navigate their own emotions. Because it's not the adult version of you that cares so much. It's not the adult version of you. The adult version of you is avoidant to sitting down with that child. That's where your avoidance comes from. And I feel like if a man or a woman can pride themselves on one thing, it should be one, to not avoid any emotion that comes up. Because that which you suppress is only bottled up and will build up for it to come out sooner or later. One. And number two is to constantly do things that they're reluctant to do. And what this does is it builds a muscle. Yeah. It enables you to progress as an individual and face your shadows, which is what taking your own advice requires you to do. I know people like to say that it's not always about productivity and you're not just a project that constantly needs to be worked on and keep growing. But I honestly think that the evolutionary aspect of you is learning to unravel that understanding that you have of life to serve you. The way that we are now, the way our inner child is, has a lot to do with our parents and the way that we were raised. But, our parents didn't know any better, right? So we give them the benefit of the doubt. We are adults now, so it's our responsibility to sit down with ourselves and navigate through that emotion in the name of self-love, guide ourselves through all the emotional trauma and sit with ourselves long enough to come out the other side. So to those watching, taking your own advice requires you to sit with yourself long enough till you have molded with the shadow that you're afraid to face. And slaying that dragon is coming to the realization that there is no dragon to be slayed, but only one to be soothed and tamed. And to find peace and the absence of resistance with sitting down with your younger self and guiding it through his or her emotions and giving your younger self the advice your adult self is well aware of. So I use this video to say, learn to take your own advice. It is the most difficult thing to do in life. Because the easiest thing to do is to be able to give somebody else advice or offer them criticism. But it's your ability to sit down and face yourself long enough to overcome and mold with your shadow, to soothe your inner child, to then be able to take your own advice and come out a champion on the other end. Thank you guys for watching. Like, subscribe, and comment. I'll see you guys in the next video.